Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. No mai, hoki mai, everyone. Today I am talking to one of our scholarship recipients, Hamish Lee. I am super excited about this younger generation coming through who are so innovative and have this huge social conscience as well. And Hamish's team has got a rich history. His Collective Intelligence has got a huge history of innovation. It's a team that's actually been together now for 15 years and evolving, and the membership has been developing through that time. And reflecting back over the history of this team, it has, I think the key thing for me, remembering who has been there before, the whakapapa of this team, is that it's got a rich history of innovators, and Hamish absolutely embodies that. And I am really looking forward to hearing his short history as a young man, but the things that he is applying his knowledge and passion to. So, Hamish, good morning.
Morning, Harv. Thank you for having me here today. My friends have told me I've got a great face for radio, so looking forward to giving it a whirl.
Yes, well, yeah, I'm not going to comment on that, but yeah, they might be right. They might be right. So, Hamish, quickly, who are you?
So, yeah, I'm Hamish Lee. I'm a 33-year-old male, born and raised in Hawke's Bay. In my earlier years, grew up on a farm just outside of Waipukurau. Went to primary school in Waipak, secondary school in Hastings, and then in Wanganui. Then did a Bachelor in Mechanical Engineering down at the University of Canterbury, down in Christchurch. My last year at uni was 2011 when the earthquakes hit. So, yeah, that was quite a memorable year for good and bad reasons, but really enjoyed Canterbury Uni and really enjoyed engineering. And then after that, headed out into the world and spent most of my 20s travelling, and back when pre-COVID times when you could go anywhere and see anything. So I'm glad I was pursuing that endeavour at that time. My little sister's about to head off on her OE, and it's the world's a lot different now, thanks to COVID. So, yeah, had a really fun time. Travelled the world. Eventually, grew a bit tired of the backpacker lifestyle. And wanted to get a bit more under the skin of the foreign places I was visiting, rather than just blowing through for a few days at the local hostel, getting drunk and chasing girls, which was a lot of fun, but eventually wore off. So,
well, going back to the face that you've got, it would have been challenging. Right?
yeah. Luckily, the listeners can't see what I'm working with, but hopefully, my vocal charm can win them over. Yeah. So once that sort of kicked off, I was in very remote places in Southeast Asia and South America and Africa and such, and wanted to apply my trade in terms of the skills that I'd learnt at Canterbury Uni in regards to designing and installing and commissioning solar solar systems, solar electricity systems. So that's what I specialised in my later years of mechanical engineering, was geared towards renewable energy technology and what that can do. And so got on Google and started to look for NGOs mainly that were working in the areas that I was travelling, and managed to fall into some really cool projects installing solar all around the world, really. First was in Tonga. We installed 5, I think they were about 10 or 20 kilowatt systems, which roughly equates to 30 to 60 solar panels on 5 local high schools there. And then, got a gig in the Philippines, installing standalone solar systems in birthing clinics through the eastern islands. They have a lot of typhoons there, and often the electricity goes out and babies are born in the dark. So we were electrifying these birthing clinics. And then I went to Cambodia and worked for an NGO there, installing solar systems for people that didn't have power, that were living in hardship. One particular site was this community that lived on a landfill, and their means of survival was rummaging through the landfill. And this other American NGO that was working with us had built them houses, and so our job was to electrify them. And then went to Myanmar and electrified an orphanage there. Ended up in Africa. Did a microgrid out in the black box of Kenya. Ended up in the Himalayas in India, and we electrified a monastery and a school at 6,000 metres, right up in the Himalayas between India, China and Pakistan. And so had an awesome time, both professionally and, I suppose, for better lack of the word, spiritually. Traveling around to these communities and meeting, people that you would never meet on the usual backpacker trail, and getting to help, apply my trade and help these people was a lot of fun, but also very rewarding. And in amongst all of that, applied to go back to university in Europe. And I was lucky to land a full scholarship to do a double master's degree in renewable energy at 2 universities, one in Portugal in Lisbon and one in the east of France in Grenoble. And so spent, I think it was about 3 years back at university, and learning all about renewable energy technology and management from some top European universities and lecturers and colleagues, and that was an amazing experience, a lot of fun, studying in a foreign country, but also learning more in depth about my chosen topic. And then I suppose at the end of all of that, boomeranged back home, back to Hawke's Bay, and I suppose I was in a lucky position where I'd picked up a lot of skills and experience, and had a lot of choice, and that sort of stems from my family situation, whereby I've always been given a lot of opportunity from my parents and encouraged to do whatever I want and be whatever I want. And so I got home, and at that point I was, and still am, really quite addicted to surfing. And so I thought, I want to be able to surf every day. That's important to me. So I'm going to start my own business so that I can surf every morning.
That'll do it.
Yeah. Naive little newbie entrepreneur. And yeah, I suppose initially for maybe like the first, so that was 4 years ago that I started my company called Greener. And maybe for the first year I was surfing quite often, but nowadays I'm too busy to surf much.
And Hamish, you are recently are a father.
Yeah. So had my first child in January, 3 months ago, a little baby girl called Stevie. It was a pretty rough landing to earth for Stevie, and we spent a couple of weeks in hospital in intensive care down in Wellington, and then in Skiboo in Hawke's Bay. So that was a baptism by fire in terms of an introduction into parenthood. But Stevie and Mum are both doing really well now, and we are stumbling through each day and learning each moment. My partner and I are new to each other, relatively speaking, and Stevie landed. We actually only moved in with each other a month or two before Stevie landed, so we're figuring out each other while at the same time figuring out how to be parents, while at the same time trying to run a startup and also build a house. So there's a lot of balls in the air, and it's a testing time for us, on the back of no sleep, trying to juggle all of those balls. But we're getting through it.
And Hamish, thank you for fitting me in this morning. That sort of, with all that going on, and the reason I wanted to bring that up, because I think it fits very much into the, what's driving you with your business and so forth, and the future and so forth. But congratulations on becoming a father. And before we start, I said, if it goes well, it's really tough. And if it's tough, it's really, really tough. So, well done. I know there was, lots of people concerned for you guys through that period. So, yeah, it's good that you're starting to make some progress there now, and Stevie's settling down.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Hamish, I want to go back to that period you were travelling around and installing in these sort of remote and underprivileged communities. Was that with one NGO that was sending you around, or was that how are you getting from job to job? What was the connection there?
No, it was. I fell on my feet in terms of a network of people, great people, and a lot of those NGOs that were working in that renewable energy space were connected to each other, even across borders. And so how it happened would I be working away, and I was in my 20s and I was kind of traveling the world with a backpack and bare feet, and so I was pretty robust. And I'd say throughout my childhood, hard work was prioritised and instilled in us kids as we were growing up, from my granddad, who's a bit of a hero for all of us, worked, and then seeing my parents do the same, so I think that that good work ethic and coupled with some enthusiasm to adventure and the skills that I'd learned at university, I think people were like, oh shit, this guy can do it. We'd be off out in the back blocks of the jungle somewhere, and a generator would break down, and I worked as a mechanic for my first job. When I was 13, Mum and Dad used to throw me in the old farm truck, send me up the road with no licence, and I'd work at a mechanics in the holiday. As an aside, I only found out years later that they were actually paying my wages at the mechanics. I thought I had a real job, but Mum and Dad were paying paying the mechanic to give me a job. So yeah, that's just that's testament to what they valued, and wanted to instill in us kids. But so we'd be out in the jungle, and a generator would break down, and everybody would scratch their head, and I'd rip open the carb and fix it, and so I think I became noticed as valuable and handy. And so these NGO decision makers and personnel, once the project was up, they'd be like, "Oh, we've got a colleague who's working in, Timbuktu, and they are off on another project." Or, I'd be working in a team on one project, and they'd be like, "Oh, we've got this other project coming up. Do you want to get involved in that?" And so I just got haured out and passed around to all of these different projects, and I lapped it up. It was awesome.
And what period of time was that over, Hamish?
It was after I.
So how many, was that months? Was it a year? Was it?
The projects were typically 2 to 3 months at a time. And yeah, I was doing that for I don't know, on and off over 4 to 6 years maybe.
Okay. So that's a big piece of time.
Yeah, most of my 20s was quite consumed by this. In the middle of that, there was a few years of university as well.
Yep. And
university holidays, I'd also go off and be sent to various places to work on these types of projects. But yeah, it was the bulk of my 20s.
Because there's this magic figure of 10,000 hours of doing something for 10,000 hours. You start getting really good at something. And
yeah,
I was thinking,
Outliers is one of my favourite books.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about that and go, you were, that period would be pretty intense, learning experience for you through that stage, right?
Yeah, intense, not really in terms of a engineering theoretical point of view. These systems were typically small and simple. But, being sent 6,000 metres up into the Himalayas, and having to walk and carry, gear in and out to a remote monastery. There was a group of about, 20 or 30 on that project. And, every day 2 or 3 would drop with altitude sickness and have to be, evac'd or triaged. So, I suppose, at least compared to what I'm doing now, the technical engineering component wasn't intense, but holistically, it was some challenging environments, different cultures, language barriers, different or limited food, extreme weather. Yeah, it was a lot, but it was fun. I loved it.
And the spiritual thing, what? Because some of those communities you're talking about, you'd have spirituality in some of those communities is a big deal. Yeah. Mm. What were the learnings? What were the learnings through that from a spiritual point of view?
I suppose for me, one of the biggest learnings in terms of people's spirituality and cultures was diversity, and me fostering and growing what I think's a strong acceptance of diversity. A lot of these places I was visiting were very different to the community before and after, and a lot of them I noticed were very committed and devoted to their spirituality and their way of thinking. And these people are isolated, so they don't even have influence of other ideas and cultures. So their God, for example, whoever that may be, is the only God. Whereas I was getting passed around all of these different cultures and getting exposed to all of these different gods. And so I did observe in myself, no one culture or community is more right in their beliefs than another, and each is unique and beautiful in its own way, and so that's the idea that grew in me. But I noticed the opposite in the places I was going. I remember in Myanmar, the community that I was in was very, very devout, devoutly Christian, and the moving around, meeting people even before they'd ask your name. Sometimes it would be like, which denomination are you? And I'd say, I don't believe in God. I'm atheist. They didn't even know what that meant, so I just say I don't believe in a God. And I'd be met with shock and awe, and what do you mean? And then that was an interesting observation from my experience in regards to spirituality.
Hamish, the person who left New Zealand to the one that came back, what was the biggest changes in you going through that experience?
I suppose what I just said in terms of having a better acceptance for people's differing ideas and beliefs. That's been an important one, and a valuable one, I think. Not getting too stuck believing that you're right, and whatever that may be. We're just talking about in terms of culture and spirituality, but also in business and technically in relationship and valuing other people's ideas. I think, and to be fair, it's still throughout my life and even now, thinking that I'm the rightest is a bit of a barrier for me, and so something I try to acknowledge and work on. So that also a confidence, I would say, leaving the nest as a young 20-something-year-old, going out into the world, with a backpack, for many years, and failing and learning and learning lots. It definitely made me confident in the fact, in my own ability. I can adapt, I can do stuff, I can be thrown into a back blocks jungle and work it out, so and have fun and enjoy it along the way, even look to for those challenging situations, like in the Himalayas or in Africa when something breaks, and we came across a plethora of little obstacles along the way, and just knowing that you can work through them gives you a bit of confidence that when you get back to New Zealand, to this cushy environment that I live in, that the little speed bumps day to day are pretty manageable. Especially, I remember when I was living in Cambodia, I was in Phnom Penh, the capital, and each day I'd walk to the office where I was working, and I'd walk past a mum and about 4 kids living in a cardboard box. And, I saw that same scenario time and time again all around these communities. But, often I think about that family, and it puts my challenges in a shifts the perspective on my own challenges, if you know what I mean. And that's a valuable learning for me.
Yeah, and we forget, Hamish, that living in New Zealand is cushy, and it's been interesting to see some of the discomfort in the last 2 years in New Zealand that, people forget how privileged we are to live here. Yeah. Just want to touch on the 2 master's degrees at the same time. What's that about?
Oh, they weren't consecutive; they were concurrent.
I don't care. What's that about? As in, to me, it's why would you take that on? What was the need to do that?
Yeah, I think at the time. Oh, I remember. At the time, I'd run out of money, and I was somewhere, and wasn't quite ready to come home because I knew that was the end game, was to come home and be an adult. But I wanted to drag that eventuality out a bit. So, and I had a friend's partner's brother who told me about a study scheme called Erasmus Mundus, which is EU wide, and thought, oh, that'd be cool, go to Europe. I'd never been to Europe, and so I applied for a scholarship, and got it, fully funded, including a living stipend, to go and study in Europe, and actually, at the same day that I got confirmation for that scholarship, I was also given a job to go into the Pacific and install big solar in one of the early, what is now quite commonplace solar projects in the Pacific, but back then it was one of the first, and it was a really well-paid job. Doing what I had been doing, but on a much bigger, more technical scale. And so both these opportunities landed in my inbox on the same day. I was in Thailand, actually, I remember now. And I was like, holy shit, someone's pulling some strings upstairs for me. And in the end, it was quite an easy decision. And, I thought, those job opportunities will be there in the future. But, this opportunity to go back to university won't be there again, possibly. So I ended up going to Europe. Was late to the semester starting because I think I was in Myanmar or the Philippines or something, and arrived at my university in Lisbon in Portugal and was a total fish out of water. This is at least 3 or 4 years since my last year at Canterbury. So sat down in a lecture hall, started listening to the lecturer rattle on about complicated mathematical formula, and I just thought, fuck, Hamish, you have stuffed this one up. You are not supposed to be here. And yeah, I remember those first few weeks were pretty tough adjusting to that lifestyle, and I was on the phone to home in tears, and I was like, what have I done? This is not where I'm supposed to be. But just ground it out and eventually found a crew, of that I could study and learn with, which made me feel less alone. Studying engineering in itself is tricky, but trying to do that in a foreign university with a foreign language. My lectures were in English, but everything else outside of those lectures was in either Portuguese or French. So even just accessing help was difficult because of that language barrier. But yeah, I got through it and had an awesome time. And in my cohort at university were people from India and Costa Rica, all through Europe, Ukraine, Australia, heaps of different like-minded people like myself, all learning together and striving for a similar goal. So yeah, in the end, made a really strong community there within those universities and had an absolute ball.
And what was the common goal?
Well, it was all centred around learning about and then implementing technology and systems in the realm of renewable energy. That was the crux of it. We were all within our class of sort of 50-ish, I think. There were different streams. I was in the solar, wind, hydro branch, but there was clean coal, there was nuclear, a few others, and yet everybody. Actually, no, there was more than 50. It was like a couple of hundred wide if you spread it across over the whole of Europe, and there might have been 20 or so universities within our framework, in our system. So everybody was there to, like me, learn about and then implement technology and processes to make energy greener.
And this term, I've never heard it before, clean coal. What the fuck is clean coal?
Yeah, it does sound like a bit of an oxymoron, doesn't it? And obviously that wasn't my wheelhouse, because like you, I was like, that doesn't fit. But, a lot of European countries, especially out east, like coal is their bread and butter, Poland and the likes. And, even Germany, they're starting to phase it out, or continuing to phase it out. But, we've got something like 10% coal in New Zealand, but some of those countries, it's the majority, 80, 90% coal-fired electricity. So even, obviously coal's not a great thing, but for those communities, coal is their reality. And so even if they can make, 1, 2, 5, 10% incremental changes and improvements, across a whole electricity sector, as an absolute value, that's a significant change. So, yeah, that's what these kids were learning. They were learning how to make their current electricity system better, greener.
So, before we get to the present day, was there a moment in your childhood, was there a moment where you thought, this is what I want to do, I want to create cleaner, greener energy?
No, I don't think I had those sorts of thoughts until maybe second year Canterbury. First year engineering in Canterbury is very generic, and then from then you start to specialise. And I think one of our generic papers touched on these sorts of technologies, solar, using biomass, residuals from forest activity to make clean ethanol and cogen plants and stuff like that. And so sort of dipped my toes in that sort of subject and thought, shit, this is cool, And it satisfied a couple of important values for me in terms of, engineering technology at the cutting edge, which my whole life I've been interested in Lego and aeroplanes and building huts and machines and, engineering in its purest sense. But also a strong part of my upbringing was outside. when I got 3 siblings, and when Mum was sick of us, she'd say, "Go outside and play. Give us an axe or a pocket knife," and later in years a chainsaw and a hammer, and said, "Go and build a tree hut. Go and dig a hole. Go and play outside." And we had a ball. We lived on a farm. We'd do sheep rodeos. Every tree had a tree hut in it. Every valley had a zip line across it. Every stream was dammed. We had a lot of fun playing outside. And then in the holidays, Mum and Dad would take us camping and fishing and skiing, and that immersion in nature was pivotal and forefront in our growing up. So this idea that I could devote my career to something that was both engineering and technologically motivating and stimulating, but also had that environmental preservation aspect to it, it was a no-brainer. I was like, shit, yeah, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. And at that time it was 20. It was 2009, 2010, 2011. A lot of my uni friends from engineering and geology were going over to Australia and getting moon money to work for the mining industry. And power to them. I got no qualms with them. They made a shitload of money and had a ball. But my calling wasn't in line with that industry. I wanted to my calling and my spirit was a lot more in line to something more environmentally friendly, and so that's where I chose my elective papers. Was down that route, and then, like I said, the rest just sort of flowed from there.
So, Hamish, coming forward to today, tell us about Greener. What does Greener do, the business?
Yes, I founded Greener about 4 years ago, and at the start it was just me for maybe a year or two, and kind of all along, Greener's bread and butter has been residential solar electricity design, installation, maintain. So, a typical customer, might be, own their own home and has a significant power bill, say north of $300 a month. And they'll come to us and say, "Hey, we've got this big power bill, so we'd like that addressed, but we're also cognizant of the fact that solar systems are environmentally friendly, and we can have some control and even some sovereignty over where our electricity comes from." And so that's where our deliverable fits in. We will provide a free design and quote, and then if accepted, me and my team will we'll install said solar system on said house and get it up and running, and then Greener is there hopefully forever for ongoing support. One of the real beauties of solar is it's very low maintenance, especially compared to wind and hydro. Wind and hydro, you're talking about a machine with moving parts and bearings and seals and stuff like that. But solar panels are essentially just big squares of glass that sit on your roof, and they churn away. As long as the sun comes up every day, they'll churn away for north of 50 years, providing you with on-site clean energy.
So, Hamish, there's been lots of pushback recently. You mentioned hydro, which in New Zealand emits a huge amount of carbon into the air because of the concrete. I think the dams down south that were built years ago will be carbon neutral sometime in the future. They haven't, they're still negative in the carbon sphere because of the amount of cement that was in there. There's lots of negative around solar, negative press around, not solar, around wind, because those turbines gobble up so much carbon to create and energy to create those. And I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that. But what about, so with solar, the carbon produced or needed to produce solar panels, how does that equation look?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think all of these systems need to be analysed objectively and unbiasedly to make sure that they are what people like me claim they are. So I couldn't comment on in regards to the what you said about the hydro dams and the wind turbines in any detail. Other than the fact that, my gut tells me they are a better alternative than a big coal plant, which I think would be undeniably agreed across the board. But in terms of solar, approximate one panel will offset the same amount of carbon that's used to create it in its first 3 years of operation. And these panels have a 25-year manufacturer's warranty and a north of 50-year design life. So that being said, if your solar panel lasts for 50 years, you've got 47 years of net environmental positive effect, which is pretty good numbers for most people, looking at it from an environmental point of view. So that's where solar fits in. But every solution is fraught with limitations. Solar panels, like I say, typically last 50 years. But then what happens after 50 years? At the moment, there's not a established solar panel recycling system because there's not sufficient numbers of solar panels coming out of circulation, at least in New Zealand. But once those solar panels do, so solar panels generally don't stop working; they just degrade in performance by about 1% per year. So after 50 years, your 100-watt solar panel might only be producing 50 watts, and at a point it becomes, there's a cost-benefit analysis where you decommission them. So what happens when those panels are decommissioned? Yeah, currently there is no good answer to that in New Zealand.
But 50 years is a long time in this field.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that the renewable energy engineers that are at primary school and high school and university now, once that problem becomes a problem in the future, that they'll be ready to, make their own businesses and deal with that when it arises.
Hamish, I heard from a futurist a few years ago, and she was talking about how industries like the solar industry were doubling. So the technology was doubling at that point, and we're getting better and better and better. Is that true?
Possibly at a time. Now, the status quo is that the solar panel performance, I would say, has pretty much plateaued. The real change over the last decade has been the economics. So the price has, I think over the last decade, don't quote me on this, but it's something close to, a 97% decrease in cost over the last decade. and that results in interesting economics whereby, now technologies like solar and wind, purely on a dollars and cents basis without subsidies, are the cheapest form of electricity generation, and that tipping point is only quite recent. Prior to, the last few decades, coal and, and gas and the like have just been so dirt cheap that these new emerging technologies just don't even get a show in, even with subsidies. But, markets change, and thankfully these economic forces are a tailwind and are really supportive for this new type of generation, which is fantastic. Imagine coming to a decision maker and saying, hey, not only can you, green up your electricity generation, but it's also going to cost you less.
Hamish, that sovereignty, you talked about sovereignty of power, right, of energy. And, you mentioned Ukraine before, and you think about what's going on in Europe. And I heard John Elkington speak recently, who was a thought leader on future of economies and so forth, and saying that in the last 50 years, when the green space has been getting going, there's been shocks coming in, wars, there's been GFCs, there's been all sorts of things hit, and the momentum dies away because people go back to the here and now problem, 9/11, those sorts of things. And he said it's interesting, this speech was only a couple of weeks ago, that the war in the Ukraine hasn't had a blip on the focus of developing better energy sources. And so he said, we've now got a really, not a major war, but it's a pretty intense situation. But the focus hasn't been taken away from the green space and renewable energy. And he says it's the first time the world hasn't been distracted from what they need to get on with. And he saw that as being a really positive effect and going, yep, okay, we've got a war going on here and all the shit that goes with that, but we still need to absolutely commit and focus here. And in fact, for a lot of countries in Europe, they've gone, holy shit, you know what? We need to have a lot more sovereignty on our energy production and stop relying on Russia for gas and oil and so forth.
Yeah.
And he said that's the first time it's been like that in 50 years, which was a really interesting comment.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good, isn't it?
It is good,
yeah.
Right? And it's about shit getting real now.
Yeah.
Right? It's we have been, the IPCC reports just come out this week, and, there is, it's going to be really, really difficult for the likes of the farming sectors because the spotlight on those sectors is not going to go away. The spotlight on anything that is producing methane, is putting too much carbon in the air, that spotlight is just going to get more and more and more intense. What are your views on that?
No, it's a hot topic, Harv, especially within my circle of friends and family. I think change is mandatory. If we want to have clean air and thriving ecosystems and an ocean that isn't going to swallow us up, change has to happen. And change is often painful. Like we've set up our status quo to be very comfortable, and we as humanity have got very used to that comfort, and it's only natural that letting go of that comfort, you're going to get friction from every corner. In terms of food production and land it's a very, very important discussion, and a discussion that's a bit sticky, but it's a discussion that has to be had. We're seeing it now with the forestry issue up and down the coast, agriculture and the pros and cons that come with that, horticulture, mass monocopping of horticulture and the pros and cons that come with that. What's the answer? It's a good question. Probably a whole series of podcasts needed to cover it. My own opinion is that the status quo definitely has to change, and in my opinion, the lowest hanging fruit, or one of the lowest hanging fruit, is diet. That's something that consumers make decisions on multiple times a day, every day. And so if we can start to align those decisions around diet to be more soft on the environment, then I think that's very doable. And in my opinion, I think education in this space is paramount, and is probably pretty resource light to give that information, especially in schools. If we can educate our young people to not stipulate meat and dairy for every meal. Maybe meat and dairy become a treat. I think teaching our kids, starting at primary school, should be taught how to grow veggies. Everybody's got, a lot of people have backyards. It's hard to grow a crop of beef or lamb in those backyards, but it's not that hard to grow spinach and kale and veggies and other food. So, that's my brief take on it. My family and friends, we have heated debates about this around the dinner table all the time, and it's really polarizing because a lot of people and communities, including my own, all of my majority of my family are farmers. They farm sheep and beef, and a lot of those people and communities have built their whole way of living around that activity, and to change it is to uproot their whole being, which is hard.
Yeah, it is. And, Hamish, I've farmed for 30 years, and I farm a small block now, only 8 hectares, and we've converted that to regenerative. And that's been a really hard change, just on 8 hectares. But it's been a hard change to unlearn so much of the old way of doing things. And now looking at these multi-species, getting away from artificial fertilisers, putting in additives, and I'm about to apply vermicast in the next in about 4 weeks' time over the whole place, which comes from the largest worm farm in the world, which is in Te Awanga. And I'm really excited by that, and it's just we are growing pastures that I don't even recognise. I don't even know. People say, what's that? And I go, it's in the mix somewhere. And because it's not my job, if it was my job, I would be a lot more up with it. But the flip side of that, Hamish, is that we have more bird life, we have more insects, we have more flowers on our property than we've ever had before. And the difference that makes on our well-being is huge. And to go out and to see flowers coming through and going, what is that? And is just fabulous. Or going out into a field and listening to the bees, right, is something I never did as a commercial farmer. But we can.
Do you think it's possible to do that as a commercial farmer?
Absolutely. 100%. It's more possible It's more possible than the conventional style, Hamish, because I've got neighbours around us that still import palm kernel. I mean, for fuck's sake, it's ridiculous. And I've still got farmers who have got dairy farms devoid of trees, literally devoid of trees. And on our 8 hectares, we've been planting over 100 trees a year for the last 8 or 9 years, right? And it's amazing where you see to put them in. And we haven't worked out what our carbon sink is and so forth now, but we are producing better quality food, and we haven't put on chemical fertiliser for years. And we measure the carbon in the soil every year, and it's amazing to see the depth increasing every year. We're on sand country, right? We're 3 kilometres from the west coast. So, and education is the key, because it's really hard because I wasn't taught, my generation were not taught about biology. We were taught about NPK and putting that in. We weren't taught about mycelium. We weren't taught about earthworms. We weren't taught about that there is more living biomass under the ground than above the ground. It's like, what? That's crazy shit. But there's more going on under there. And if we apply chemicals, it destroys that. Right? It knocks it back. If we plough the ground, if we cultivate the ground, it destroys it. So all that stuff is a huge amount of unlearning that's got to go on, and it's really uncomfortable, And I've written about this in my blogs, talking about giving up the agrarian cocaine of using nitrogen. It was just such a lovely, quick fix. But the good thing is now it's too bloody expensive to use because the price of fuel's gone up. So that's changed. But it's a really interesting space right now, Hamish. And the key change I think we need to make with the whole farming system is that, and I remember a very interesting guy, Brian Richards, said this years ago, we've perfected the art in farming of producing more for less. And we need to change that mindset to produce less for more. So we need to be producing high-end nutritious food and capturing more value from it. And we can absolutely do that. And, you talked about the vegetables growing. Roebuck Farm up in Taranaki is the most wonderful example of that. And one of our members, Jules Matthews, is now doing that down in Whitemans Valley. And this is regenerative systems producing high-quality, nutritious food. And I see that as a win-win, Hamish. So it'll be better for our health. We're an obese population, and we need to be eating better food and producing less of it, if that makes sense, and also not wasting so much. So much of our food is wasted; it ends up in landfill, huge quantities of it. So all those systems change have got to. Do you
think it's more farmer driven or consumer driven? I look at it like farmers are running a business, providing a product for what the consumer demands. And a lot of farmers that I talk to, they're not emotionally bound to sheep and cattle. And they say, hey, if the consumer demanded a different product off our land, then we'd pivot and would match it. So
I'm not sure I agree with that. But also that
people want to eat meat, don't they? Consumers like the taste of meat.
Yeah, and
cheese. And
I grew up eating meat every day, right? Sometimes twice a day, and I don't do that anymore. It's we would go for days without eating meat, and you very quickly get used to that. So I think, there's all sorts of changes that need to happen. And the thing with the IPCC report is they added a fifth category in this report, and I haven't read it yet, but the category is around what human change needs to happen for us to address the problem. So, there's technical change, this is what needs to happen, and there's adaptive change, what gets in the way. And at the moment, what's getting in the way is humans not responding to what they need to do, I believe. So I think there's a whole plethora of stuff that needs to change, and
yeah, I wonder if it gets to a legislative state. I've said it before. It doesn't sound very nice, but I wouldn't be surprised if within my lifetime, commercial meat and dairy becomes outlawed. For its negative effects on the environment.
And that wouldn't that be tragic if that happened? I mean, look at the mandate with vaccine and the furore that happened, right? And I don't want to get into that conversation whether it was right or wrong. It was a mechanism for bringing about change. I would like to think that rather than seeing the likes of regenerative as being a negative, is seeing it for what it can be, and being able to produce animals off pastures that are more naturally aligned. Of course, they're not completely natural, but creating and understanding nature more. I think that's the big mystery or the big learning, and that we need to understand that as humans we are nature, and how do we be in nature? That's the big mind shift change.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I always think that, educating a young mind is going to be easier than educating an old mind, I think. It's a spicy topic.
It's a spicy topic. And, this latest report, it's a bit, there is becoming less and less places to hide. I mean, we used to have these conversations about, not that long ago, was climate change, had humans affected or not. We're not having those conversations anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
Very few people are. That now it's people have got their head around that. So I think, the conversations on the next stage of looking at and really championing companies like, this Mine Oak, which is the biggest worm farm in the world, are looking at helping councils get rid of their waste and turning their waste into a positive. That's a wonderful outcome. And they're working with, it's phenomenally exciting that you can use worms to gobble up this waste and turn it into vermicast.
Yeah, and like the entrepreneur in me sees that as a opportunity, a commercial opportunity. There's a great example of that in the Bay here with a company called BioRich. People pay BioRich to take their green waste. BioRich turn it into a useful product, fertilizer and compost, and then they sell it on. So what a great business model.
Yep, 100%. And teaching kids how to compost. It's such a. I often think it's a sign of old age that you start getting excited about composting. But I am a devout composter. And it's fascinating to see how you can turn waste and develop the system that worms just turn up to live in it. So yeah, and it's the thing is we've got you've got a 3-month-old baby, Hamish. It's sort of all of a sudden the shit gets real that are we leaving the world in a better place than we found it? Yeah. Hamish, to wrap up this conversation, what do you see the big changes for greener going forward?
I suppose the one thing that initially springs to mind is growth for the business. Predominantly got most of the startup teething sussed. We've landed on a really slick deliverable. We just installed a 200 panel solar system for a commercial client in Napier, and that package came financed, and so the crux for that client is that they pay $0 up front. The monthly fixed fee for the finance is less than the savings delivered by the solar system, making it cash positive for their books from day one, and with projected savings over 20 years of $400,000. So they're getting $0 up front, cash flow positive, and $400,000 savings over 20 years. And so that's like the state of play with solar at the moment. And, you know, I tell that to other potential clients, and they're like, "What? Are you serious? That's too good to be true." But it's not. Like that's where we're at with it. So, you know, you can get those financial benefits while getting the environmental benefits, while also showing to your customers that you care about the environment. You know, like a lot of our commercial clients really show off the fact that they've got solar panels on their roof, and their customers love it.
Yeah, look, this fits into, our office now has solar panels, and which fits very much into the B Corp mould, where they've up with the accreditation for that. The environmental factor has become a lot bigger in the last 3 years since we last recertified, and that's a really important part of that accreditation. But things like that, Hamish, what you've just said, that's talks to what John Elkington goes on about in the UK, is that the green economy, wrote a book last year called The Green Swan. And he talks about the green economy is not something we need to be fearful of. The green economy is going to create a whole lot of more opportunities. And we've just talked about 3 of them now with Mine Oak and this other waste and what you're talking about. And that those figures there are absolute. People understand that, right? That it comes with a finance package. Because the other thing that we hadn't mentioned is that environmentally, over the next 20 years, that company is going to have less negative impact on the environment because they've got the solar panels on their roof.
Totally. Yeah, and, after the finance term runs for 7 years, after those 7 years, they own the solar system. And if and when they go to resell that building, they've got a really valuable addition to the sale of the building. So, even if you don't give a fuck about the environment, even if you're a pure capitalist in that sense, you look at this and you're like, holy shit. From a dollars and cents point of view, you're an idiot not to. Which is cool, because you get the win-win. You get both. You get the dollars and you get the positive environmental effect.
Hamish, I'm going to finish on that note. I think that's stunning, a stunning end to the conversation, because that is such a lovely comment to finish on. Unless you've got one last piece you'd like to jump on, but that was fabulous as a bookend to the conversation.
No, I think we've talked about a lot and got underneath the skin. So I'm happy with the outcome of my first ever podcast. So thanks a lot for the opportunity, Harv. It's been fun, and thank you to you for giving me the opportunity to get involved with CQ. I've only had one meeting at the moment, but took a lot from it, and looking forward to a long and prosperous relationship with CQ. And I'm really close with my crew already. So thanks for everything you do, mate. Really appreciate it.
Hamish, it's a pleasure most of the time. But it's thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's I'm really excited about the space we're in now, which is the scholarship program which you're part of is something that we're really passionate about, and seeing the work that the scholarships are working on is fabulous. So Hamish, thank you, and good luck to Greener, and good luck being a father, and hope the next few years are not as tough as the last 3 months have been, but I'm sure they won't be. But yeah, good luck for everything you're doing, mate.
Beauty. Thanks a lot, Hav. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.